Hi, and welcome to episode 49 of Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things. We've taken 2 weeks off. I can't remember what caused the first week, and
Labor Day.
That's right. It was Labor Day. And last week I was out of town in the heat, sweltering heat and humidity of Washington, D.C., which was pretty horrible. Sam, the moment I didn't even what's the jet bridge? Is that what it's called that connects the terminal to the airplane?
Yep.
I exited the aluminum tube that is an airplane, like stepping onto the jet bridge, and the wall of humidity that hit me was horrific. I haven't experienced anything like that in a long time. I live in the state of Washington, so it's much different.
DC in early September is a very sticky place.
Yes.
Yeah. I hope
can confirm.
I hope you brought your gold bond.
How are you?
I am doing well. You were at a conference in DC the same week or weekend that I was also attending a conference, but mine was here in Detroit, but I did present. And so Sunday was spent preparing for that. So our 2 weeks off were a nice respite. We apologize for the lack of forewarning, but we are back to announce the next, I guess, the short run of episodes. I think we've got about 6 planned episodes. And do we want to talk briefly about what will happen next week?
Yeah, we can do a little
advance warning. You want to go?
So, if you listen to episode 48, which was our Battle Royale fantasy Lord of the Rings game that we played with Mr. Mike Ingram, he at the end or in the middle, I can't remember where, suggested that we kind of talk about the extended editions of the films. So Sam and I have decided that we are going to, in a 6-part mini-series here, kind of digest the extended editions, one half of each film at a time. So today we will be covering the first half of the Fellowship of the Ring extended edition. And we will record next week, but then the week after that, we will be in France, actually, in the great country. Vive la France. J'adore la France. Beaucoup. So we will be in France. I am going to struggle to remember all of the French that I learned in my undergraduate French major degree.
Sean, we are banking on you to be the translator. So you better bone up.
I've been doing some Duolingo, but I think it's still going to be a slog to be able to be of assistance. Luckily, this is just a guess, but 80% of the French population speaks English. So
especially where we're going. So we'll be okay. But
regardless, we'll be okay.
Anyway, so I think the big takeaway for our listeners is that you will definitely you're getting this episode. You will get the next episode after this uninterrupted, and then they're depending on our circumstances, there may be a break in the regularity of episodes coming out over the next couple weeks, but that's because we're taking a trip. When we are back, we will get back to a regular recording schedule.
But today, first half of the Fellowship of the Ring. Now, this isn't going to be a film review where we're going to go shot by shot. We're going to stick to, I think, some of the main points of what's added by the extended editions. I think I would also like to have a general conversation. Maybe we can do this now, or we can do it at the end. Are the extended editions worth it? Watching them over the theatrical release. Maybe we'll save that for the end once we're done talking about them. But
yeah. And we figure, yes, it's been 20 years since The Return of the King was released and the Lord of the Rings trilogy wrapped, but there's some talk about remaking the trilogy, which maybe that's a conversation that we can have at some point during this miniseries. But certainly good to do a retrospective. Lord of the Rings was why this podcast started, something that Sean and I both love and adore for a variety of reasons, and want to take the opportunity to talk about these movies. And breaking it up over 6 episodes gives us plenty of time to get into depth, and also plenty of time for you listeners to catch up, watch along, try your best to remember the movies. But either way, this is the extended edition coverage, and we will be talking about the movies. So spoiler alert for that. Talking about the books, so spoiler alert for that. Although if you haven't watched Lord of the Rings at least once, I don't know why you're listening to this podcast.
Pitter patter, let's get at her.
All right.
Can I just say, if we're going to just start off the bat, this has one of the best opening sequences for a fantasy setting. You have all of this background information being played out in a flashback, theatrical style, where you have narration by Galadriel in this instance. If you've never read Lord of the Rings, this gives you all of the background you need to set yourself up for at least enjoying the films. And we can directly reference this to The Witcher, which has no background, and it just goes right into season 1. Now, I liked season 1, but you don't know any of the places, you don't know any of the people, you don't know like the main vibe of what's going on. But this film, Peter Jackson does a really good job of kind of laying out the history and then giving you a fresh slate on where our show or our movie is taking off.
Yep. And you get more or less, you get the geography of the world. You know, you have that map of Middle Earth. In fact, that map is what fades you from the prologue into the actual story, because it turns into the map that's in Bilbo's study. And yes, an excellent prologue. I mean, I think not just compared to The Witcher, but compared to the animated Lord of the Rings movie, I think that prologue really suffered. We talked about that when we covered that animated movie. Is not very well done, rather confusing. This one, it does a good job in a limited amount of time of delivering the important information. You don't even know that it's Galadriel. That's the other thing. Like, that's kind of like a little, once you've seen it, then you go back, oh, that's Galadriel. And then maybe you'll get it when you meet that character later in the movie, in the movie. But it's just and the whole, like that intro, what are the lines? The world has changed. I feel it in the water. I feel it in the earth. I smell it on the air. Like those lines. You see so many different fantasy shows and movies try to get some version of that phrase in their, the world is changing. War is, just try to make it epic, but there's nothing like the original.
And the way she does it, it's so soft and contemplative. It's almost like you can, it's easy because we know who it is. But if you're not watching it, if someone were to be like, oh, that's an elf saying that, you'd be like, oh, yeah. Because the way she's talking about the earth changing, and it seems like she's a very old person.
Yes.
Kind of witnessing all of this happen. And then you believe, like, when she's saying, she's not recounting a history that she read. She's recounting a history that she lived.
Yep.
And to me, that's what makes the prologue even more delicious.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. And then something too that we get a decent amount of in just this first half of the Fellowship is the portrayal of the elves. Thinking about the opening with Galadriel. In the prologue itself, you have the elves at war, and you get I think this was cut from the theatrical version, but you've got Gil-galad, wielding his spear to great effect. You've got Elrond. But then when we meet elves in the actual story, the first encounter is in the woods, and there's this otherworldly light, and they're glowing, and the singing kind of comes out of nowhere. And so you have this feel that the elves are somehow, they're of the world, but they're removed from the world. Then the introduction of Arwen, and then they do such a good job of this kind of airy quality of the elves, like they're walking lightly, and they physically show that with Legolas later in the movie. But the elves just have this way, and all their looks are very intentional. The long hair, the flowing the men and the women both are wearing these kind of flowing robes. And I would compare that directly to the Amazon Rings of Power, where, the elves are sporting modern haircuts, and, the whole stupid conversation about diversity aside, none of the elves actually look that elven. They look like good looking humans, or not that good looking humans. And there's just a very different feel that this movie achieved that sense that I think Tolkien intended with the elves.
And if we're going to talk about extended edition scenes, that is one of the scenes in the first half of the film that we're talking about. When Frodo and Sam first leave the Shire, we have an extended scene of the elves in singing a lament, walking towards the Grey Havens. And this is a lot of the extended scenes in all three films do a really good job of expanding the universe. And in this case, Frodo talks about them going to Valinor. And that's just one of those references where if you've read the books, you understand where and what that place is. If you've read the Silmarillion, that really opens up a whole can of worms a good can of worms, can of beans, maybe, into the world building around Tolkien and the books. So a good addition for me. I understand why it was cut from the theatrical, just because
it's time, right?
You're going to get that later on. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not central to the story that they're trying to tell. It is background. I mean, it's one of the things that makes the books and the extended edition so great. And I think, did you mention chewy or tasty or whatever it was? Like they're substantial, right? Delicious. Yeah. There's something there. It's a good way of spreading out the background of the elves to characters beyond Elrond and Galadriel, because it would get a little boring if Elrond, he later has a line of, my people are leaving these shores, where is their strength left? And that conversation with Gandalf. It's good too that is kind of queued up by Frodo's observation to Sam. And it also makes sense it's not exposition from Frodo, because Sam is genuinely interested in the elves, and this is Frodo's way of kind of telling him something about them that he didn't know before. He'd never seen an elf. And we should say too that it's kind of an homage to a portion of the book early on when Frodo and Sam run into a party of elves, Gildor and Glorian and his party, and they spend the night with them. And I think the elves give them some golden liquid or something like that. I saw like a weird loader meme on Reddit about did the elves pee in their canteens? It's like warm and golden liquid. Anyway. Not appropriate.
You do what you got to do when you're surviving.
That's true. Bear Grylls would have done it.
How about the first extended scene of this first half of Fellowship? It's really just more world building for Hobbiton and the Shire. We get a lot of additional scenes with many of the different Hobbit groups, different clans. We see their daily lives. An extended narration by Bilbo.
That it's him doing the concerning hobbits bit of the appendix from the Lord of the Rings book, which is, again, if you've read the books, you get it. And it's like, oh, I recognize that title and what he's saying, but it still works in the movie itself. What else are you going to say on this?
I don't remember.
Oh, well,
that's life.
C'est la vie. The thing that I like about this scene is that it helps build why Frodo leaving the Shire is kind of this dramatic moment, because it demonstrates the kind of idyllic nature of the Shire. And again, the theatrical version did this, but the extended edition does it even more so. It really fleshes it out, and it really shows off the incredible sets that they built for Hobbiton, and the costumes and all of the things that make it feel like a real place. And it comes off wonderfully, and that still holds up because those sets look like they were genuine, well constructed things built to last. And I think, aren't they still there? Aren't they a tourist attraction in New Zealand? A lot of the hobbits and stuff. I think Bag End is still around. I
don't know if they're the original or if they're rebuilt to be exact replicas, but
either way,
sure. Yeah. Either way,
Okay.
you can go.
And looks great.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
What are some of the scenes? Because there really is in Fellowship of the Ring, there's 30 minutes of added content total for both parts.
Yeah.
And in part one, it's all most of it is just giving more detail for the
Yeah.
world that he's setting up. So my question for you is there anything that was left out of the book from the book that was left out of the movie that you wish would have been an extended scene?
Oh gosh. Well,
That was a very convoluted way of asking that question.
no, I get the question. Yes. So, well, I know the funny thing is I know your answer to this question.
Do you?
Oh yeah, Glorfindel.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. You're right.
So Glorfindel would have been cool, but I do like Arwen.
Wait, what's the one that I'm happy that they left out?
Oh, Tom Bombadil?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so this is one of the things that kind of vitiates the Lord of the Rings fandom, whether or not Tom Bombadil should have been in the movie. And what's Noodle's opinion on this?
Noodle is not a Bombadil fan.
No. Okay. Well, it's understandable. Yeah, I do. I'm glad that they didn't insert Tom Bombadil. It would have been weird. I don't think they could have done it well, and it doesn't serve a purpose. You don't need it for the movie to be successful. And it's one of those things where probably 99 times out of 100, it's going to detract from the quality of the movie.
Just because it makes you ask so many more questions.
Yeah, and to me, some of those questions are boring. Of like, what is Tom Bombadil? Who is Tom Bombadil? And it doesn't matter because he doesn't actually play a role in the movie, right? Like if he had showed up at the end at the Battle of the Black Gate and was like shooting lightning out of his eyes, then it'd be like, okay, who is this guy? But he and I don't know the answer to this question. I've heard a couple of different theories, but it's also, again, it's not important. Things that I would have liked to have seen, just because, plot hole aside, for Return of the King, the Barrow White scene is really cool. It's spooky. It is legit dangerous. And I think in the hands of I think Peter Jackson would have done a good job with it because of his background in horror. When we get to the coverage of the Return of the King, I will get a little critical of how some of the stuff with the Army of the Dead turned out. But I think just kind of one singular scary scene in the Fellowship would have been good. But I understand also why they didn't do it. What are some other, aside from Glorfindel, what are some things that were cut that you maybe would have liked to have seen?
I think seeing Crick Hollow and Fatty Bulger.
Yeah.
I think having him would have been cool. Because, I mean, that's a huge part of the beginning of the book is Frodo going to Crick Hollow. It sets up the entire getting to Bree, and it's very abrupt in the movies. They're like, okay, we're going on this adventure. We're trying to stay away from the Black Riders. They get on Buckleberry Ferry, and all of a sudden, boom, we're in Bree. And it's really hard to tell how much time has passed. And if there would have been this, we're going to go see, what is it, Brandy Buck Hall, and have that whole scene of like the hobbits coming to the defense, like ringing the bells and having a Black Rider bust down the doors of Crick Hollow. Like that would have all been
Fatty
cool.
Bulger escaping through the back door.
Yeah. But we just don't have the time we spend with Hobbiton is, and I guess I kind of understand why they do it this way, because then it gives them, oh, this is what we're fighting for, to preserve the purity of Hobbiton. And if you show that's the Nazgul actually like attacking, danger is already making its way there. And then if you do the end of the books where Saruman and Eve Southlanders or whatever they're called,
Yeah, the I can't remember what the brigands basically,
Yeah, and then
the
they take
ruffians.
over Hobbiton, and there's that big battle at the end. I'm happy that's not in there either, but I don't know. I just would have liked to see Crick Hollow and Fatty Bulger.
Well, so you bring up an interesting point, which is the all of the Crick Hollow stuff was it it Frodo moved to Crick Hollow because it was part of his plan to go join Bilbo in Rivendell. And the other you mentioned, we don't know how long time has passed. In the books, we know it's like 17 years, right? Because he turns 33 when Bilbo turns 111, becomes that's the age of maturity for hobbits. And then I think it's when he's 50, that's when he leaves. And that was the same age that Bilbo was when Bilbo left on his adventure to the Lonely Mountain. In the book, you have all this. There's a whole chapter called The Conspiracy Unmasked, which is all about the hobbits realizing what Frodo was doing, his friends, including Fatty Bolger, but Merry and Pippin and Sam as well. And they basically try to help him on this. And we don't get any of that. And
Yeah, they run into Merry and Pippin.
It's a total accident.
Yeah,
right?
Stealing Farmer Maggot's crops.
And so the Farmer Maggot is in the book, but Farmer Maggot, they actually have not a long, but they spend a bunch of time with him. They have like a meal with him. They hide in his wagon and he drives them part of the way on the wagon. I think he had an encounter with the Black Riders earlier that day or the day before. And so you get a bunch more of this. I should say this. I think these interactions help to heighten the tension with the Black Riders that culminates with specifically the attack at Weathertop, but also kind of the raid at the Prancing Pony. But it does somewhat, I don't know, the book does such a good job of heightening the tension in the Shire with these interactions. And then they get to the Old Forest, and then there's all of the little adventures they have on the way before they even get to Bree, much less get to Rivendell. And here, the way that they compress the timeline and excise some of this stuff, it ramps up the excitement a little bit faster, but also gets you to the story that you need to get to. Like, you need to get to Rivendell so that you can actually go on the quest that is the Fellowship. You can't spend the entire time kind of wandering around the Shire. And if you had done these scenes, the entire movie could have been just getting to Bree.
Mm-hmm. And I would like to preface that these are phenomenal films.
Oh, yeah.
And every little criticism we're kind of including right now it's incredibly minor. Like, when you take the stuff that they decided to eliminate and then just watch the movies, the theatrical editions are great. You watch the extended editions, and in my opinion, it only heightens their content and what they are. But yeah, in this, we're nitpicking for sure.
Yeah. And especially when we and I guess when the filmmakers at the time knew that they're probably not going to do the scouring of the Shire the way that it was done in the book, I think they realized that a lot of the stuff they didn't need to do early on because it wasn't going to be paid off at the end of the book. So specifically some of the stuff that happens in Bree with like Bill Ferny and some of the people who are either agents of Sauron or Saruman. And so we don't get any of that. We don't get Bill Ferny, and we don't get Bill the Pony until later on.
And Bill Ferny would have been good because it's not just Black Riders, orcs, which are the two main villains we've seen at this point. But if you can throw in that there's a average just
scumbag, basically
scumbag looking guy, that is working for Sauron because they're paying him, that would have increased the intensity for me and the level of danger that they're actually in.
Well, because I mentioned this explicitly comparing the scenes in the Rings of Power show when Elrond goes to Moria and does the rock breaking contest, and how they were showing the dwarves as it was a lot of like kind of low angle shots of the dwarves drinking and being rambunctious, and it really reminded me of some of the scenes from Bree, but it was done for completely different reasons. In the movie, the folks in Bree, you're looking at them from the Hobbit perspective, and they're tall and they're pretty, they're greasy hair and torn clothes, and it's really unsettling.
And they're strange to hobbits.
Yeah,
too.
they're strange. Even though, technically in the books, like there are plenty of hobbits lived in Bree, but that, especially the scenes in the prancing pony when it's kind of slow motion and people are like, their mouths are wide open, there's like spit dribbling out and they're spilling beer on their beards, and it's really unsettling.
Unsettling for sure.
Yeah, and you in that moment I was thinking it would have been cool to have Bill Ferny here, but then again, that scene, it's really more about establishing the fact that the hobbits are truly out of their element, and then introducing them to Aragorn. And if you had a Bill Ferny type character who's we actually spent time with, I think it would have distracted from the initial suspicion of Aragorn and then their befriending him. And I think that was the important thing. So again, I understand why it was cut. In a perfect world, you would have had the time to demonstrate the fact that, as you said, it's not just orcs and ring wraiths. It's also, evil men or greedy men or power hungry men.
You had a note here about CGI.
Yeah. So I'm just thinking about, do the effects hold up? And the Lord of the Rings, this whole trilogy, you have CGI, and you get more and more CGI as you go on, especially in Return of the King. You have obviously real sets that they constructed, like Hobbiton. You've got costumes. They also used miniatures. And I was just thinking about some of the effects and do they hold up? And thinking about the CGI for the Ford of Brunnen scene, where the waters raise up and the horses, or there's the effect of the horses in the water. It looked really good. 22 years later, it looks great. And part of that's probably because it's not that hard to do CGI like whitewater, but you don't really break immersion in that scene. There are a few green screen moments that probably don't hold up as well, but then all of the stuff with practical effects still looks really good, I think. The
orcs.
Yeah.
Which we haven't really gotten yet, but I think for me, when it comes to the practical effects, that's why I love the movies, especially the miniature models that they use to film, like you brought up the Barad-dûr, even Rivendell was a painting.
Yeah, there was one scene, I think it was when the hobbits were following Aragorn out of Bree. They're coming to a hill, and in the background was Bree and kind of the surrounding countryside, and it was a matte paint, and I could tell it's a matte painting, but it was really well done. Like you can tell when something, even if you can tell when something is a matte painting versus CG, there's something just more, to your point, delicious about it being a matte painting. Whereas like CG, I would have gotten like, oh, come on, like this is Peter Jackson Hobbit trilogy stuff. Like, how hard is it just to paint some frickin', houses and some trees?
That's why I'm drawn to the Lord of the Rings movies way more than the Hobbit trilogy, because their use of CGI is awful. And you already have examples of like 10, 12 years earlier when he was using practical effects and it looked real. Yeah. And then when he throws in this CG stuff in The Hobbit, I'm like, I don't give a shit about this little orc that looks completely fake.
Maybe we'll do this, and maybe there'll be, I'm not committing to it, but I would, for this podcast, rewatch the Hobbit movies, the Peter Jackson Hobbit movies. And if we do that a lot, and I will become a broken record in saying that those movies are ugly. They are not good to look at. The CG, I think there's something weird with like the frame rate and the saturation. It just looks disgusting compared to this movie, which, again, 22 years later, and there's been remasters and whatnot, but it looks fantastic because you were shooting actual things that existed in the real world. If they were a miniature, or if they were, they're using little people actors for the hobbits in a lot of scenes to maintain the height differential between them and a human, or if it's Gandalf or Aragorn, whoever. Like, it doesn't matter how many years pass, that was still a real person in a costume.
It's going to hold up.
It's going to hold up.
And I would even take some of the CG that doesn't hold up as well to the CG that Jackson uses in The Hobbit.
Oh yeah, totally. There again, the only CG that jumped out to me as obvious was Gandalf on Orthanc.
Yes. And that one clearly looks like a little pedestal surrounded by green screen.
Yeah. And I mean, the fight between Gandalf and Saruman, where they're, kind of using the force with their staves and whatnot.
Invisible magic.
Yeah, they did a really good job of not trying to throw in some magic CGI there. The doors closing, that was all practical. Like those were real doors that were slamming shut. I'm sure there's a mechanism behind the operation of that. And you can tell because it sounds real, it looks real, that door hits with real impact. And it was fun to see, especially now having watched a lot of movies and consumed a lot of commentary on things like CG versus practical. It's just fun because it's another layer of enjoyment in this movie. Like you can tell it was a real work of art and craft and not just something that was rendered on a computer.
That's why if you buy the extended editions on Blu-ray or Ultra HD, you can get all of the behind the scenes content, which we could do episodes just on the behind the scenes shit that they put in. Because that's like each movie has like 5 to 7 hours of behind the scenes footage. And I'm just pulling that out of my ass. I don't really know how much volume of content there is, but it's a shit ton. And when you actually go in and like watch the behind the scenes of how they filmed these movies, it really changes your perspective on the difficulty, how much thought went into them, the man hours behind everything. Like when you see what they did for Edoras in Two Towers, basically building a city on top of a hill in the middle of nowhere, New Zealand, and then agreeing with the government to put it back to the way it was when they found it. So they build an entire city and then tear it down just to make this movie.
Yeah.
And you can tell how good the quality of the sets are. The like CG VFX stuff is all just so good.
The one scene so Haley and I watched the first half of Fellowship together, and one scene that I remarked on during our rewatch was the horse chase, Arwen and the ring wraiths, because that thing is shot with, I'm sure it's stunt actors. I don't think it was actually Liv Tyler on the horse the entire. I mean, for some shots it was, but it's real stuntmen or stunt women riding real horses through the real landscape. And there's the one scene where it's an aerial shot. I'm sure they're in a helicopter, and the 10 horses are all racing across the terrain, and there's trees everywhere. It looks great, and you can tell that those are real horses. They aren't CGI horses. It's not 500 CGI horses full of fake actors that just look like they're made of nothing as they're prancing across the screen. I would say the one thing I did notice in rewatch is that there's very obviously like a Frodo mannequin on the horse with Liv Tyler when she's at the ford. Like you can tell there's 1 or 2 shots you can tell. It's like, okay, that looks like rubber. It's fine. He was unconscious, right? He was phasing out of the world.
Oh no, there's definitely the Hobbit stunt doubles are little people with masks on that look like Frodo and Sam, Merry, Pippin. So yeah, and Gimli too. Like there's a scene, I was watching one of them with Carly not that long ago. It was Return of the King, I think. And there's a scene where Gimli like turns to do something, and clearly it is not Jonathan Rhys-Davies.
Which is funny because he's wearing so much makeup and a beard to begin with. Yeah. There was a scene at the very end of this first half, right as the Fellowship is formed, where they're all arrayed, and I'm assuming that it was either just John Rhys-Davies on his knees or the set itself. They built a portion of it lower because they go out of their way to show that Gimli,
it's him.
Yeah, it's John Rhys-Davies, but the character is only coming up to like the midpoint of Legolas's chest, and they're standing right next to each other. So it's little things like that where you can say, okay, it's not like that in every scene where they go to these great lengths to demonstrate that the dwarf is shorter than the elf. And you don't really have a lot of occasions otherwise where it would, they got like the should I get you a box and whatnot, where they just do it with the size of the set that they're on. But you can tell that, as to your point, somebody planned it, somebody built it, and then they shot it so that you didn't notice. And only when you've watched 20 times and you're picking it apart would you potentially notice. But even then, you only know that it's the case because in real life they're different sizes.
And then when you watch The Hobbit, I was watching the extended edition behind the scenes stuff. Ian McKellen lost his shit filming the opening scene when all of the dwarves are in Bilbo's house, because Ian McKellen was in a separate room that was designed to be miniature, so he looked big, and all of the other dwarves were in a different room that was big, so they looked small. And then they just like filmed everything both separately and then just combined the digital film together. So Ian McKellen is acting in a room by himself with nothing to go off of. And there's a scene where he like loses his shit and he's like, I can't do this, Peter.
Yeah, like I'm talking to 13 tennis balls.
Yeah. But I mean, like, that's what is so good about the Lord of the Rings, though, that like, and I know it, granted, it's harder to do it with The Hobbit because it's one large individual and then a bunch of races that are all small. So then how do the movie magic required to do that is a lot more difficult than just having 3 stunt doubles or 4 stunt doubles in a location. But to me, like, that's the difference. And it comes off in the final product when you're watching something where in the Lord of the Rings, they nail it. In the Hobbit trilogies, not so much.
Yeah. Well, this is not a Star Wars podcast, although at times we will talk about, we covered Andor. We don't exclusively talk about Star Wars, but there is no greater difference in the quality of a movie, in the difference between practical versus digital movie in effects than the original Star Wars trilogy and the prequel trilogy. Because you look at the original trilogy, especially the first 2, they went to Tunisia and filmed on location for the Tatooine stuff. They went to an actual desert, right? Like Luke's house was I think it's a hotel or something like that. For the Empire Strikes Back, they went to Norway and they filmed in the winter in Norway in a ski lodge or something like that. So they were out in the cold. And that wasn't George Lucas. That was Irving Kershner and producer Gary something is losing my memory of his name. But then you look at the prequel trilogy and it's everything shot in a sound studio. Like there are scenes of the only real thing in the scene is Hayden Christensen and his lightsaber and his costume, and everything else is blue. He jumps off of a blue platform. The background is blue. The floor is blue. Everything is going to be added in post-production. The
platforms are blue.
Yeah, it's just because and you can sit there and it's air conditioned and you can take a break and walk into the other room and grab your coffee. You're not sitting in sub-zero conditions. You're not sitting in 120-degree sandstorm conditions. It's just art through adversity, right? I think that's a saying that's out there, and you had that in the original Lord of the Rings. I'm sure this was a grind to make all the different locations, all of the travel, all of the. I mean, it's tired at this point, but Aragorn, Viggo Mortensen breaking his toe, kicking the real helmet, right? Stuff like that. You can't do that if you're sitting in your. It comes out with a different product because people have to rise to the occasion to make it work.
Slight tangent. Sam, is there anything else after our little tangent that you would like to talk about in terms of the extended edition of the first part of Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, before we call it an episode?
So just some stray observations. The scenes with Arwen and Aragorn, especially the scene in Rivendell, I turned to Haley and I said, Lord of the Rings does romance better than most romance movies. I don't think I certainly didn't appreciate that romance when I first watched this because I was a high school kid and I didn't care. I wanted to, get to the action stuff. But on rewatching it, the line of "when I met you, it was like I walked into a dream."
Mm-hmm.
Like that's a great romantic line. You know, any man out there, say that to your lady, say that
But
to your significant other.
it's
It's
very reminiscent of Baron and Luthien.
exactly, which ties into that scene earlier, which is I think it's an extended edition scene where Aragorn is singing at night, and Frodo wakes up and he's like, what are you singing?"
The Lay of Luthien.
Yeah, and Aragorn looks like he's about to cry, which is great. Excellent acting. Okay, so a couple other stray observations along that point. Frodo wakes up to Aragorn singing and talks to him. Earlier in the movie, Sam was complaining about sleeping on a root, and he was keeping Frodo awake. Flash forward to when Frodo like wakes up because of he has a vision of Gandalf falling with the Balrog, and then all the stuff with Gollum, and then he's like so messed up. The entire Lord of the Rings series is just about Frodo trying to get some sleep outside. He can't get a solid night's sleep. The other thing that Lord of the Rings is secretly about is it's a journey about sobriety. If you think about Pippin. What is Pippin doing? He's drunk the entire time that we meet him. He's drunk, he's stealing, right? He's always imbibing something. He gets the pint, and then he straightens up. He gets the intervention from Mary about smoking too much pipeweed, and then he saves the day.
I don't know, but throughout all three, every character in Lord of the Rings is like still trying to get their hands on some pipeweed.
That's true. I mean, that was just a funny thing.
It's a little.
It's not a watertight theory, okay? It's just a stray observation that there could be something to be said about it being pro sobriety. Okay, a couple other. I found some plot holes that I want to run by you, Sean.
Okay,
let's hear 'em. Major plot hole alert here, people. First of all, how does Gandalf get his staff back? Because we see Saruman take it from him in the fight, and then on the roof of Orthanc, he doesn't have his staff. And then when the Fellowship is formed, he has his staff back. What say you?
I mean, yeah, plot hole.
Major plot hole.
Major plot hole.
Game-breaking, movie-breaking plot hole, Peter Jackson.
Not so much, because I didn't notice it the first time I watched it.
No, so. It's a very small, minor thing. Okay, second, and I'll call it a plot hole. I don't think it's really a plot hole. However, the attack on Weathertop.
Okay.
Why doesn't the Witch King just stab Frodo in the throat? Why does he stab him in the shoulder? Why does he need to turn him into a wraith if he can just take the ring from him when he's dead?
So this is my interpretation.
Okay.
He knows that he's traveling. The Witch King knows that he's traveling with individuals who are not there present currently. And if you can turn the individual that is currently bearing the ring, then it will give it to you freely and you don't have to fight.
Okay.
That's at least my interpretation of
I think that's valid.
That happened. Yeah.
I think that's valid, especially if you know that in the book, Gandalf fought those ring wraiths at the same location earlier in the week. The ring wraiths don't know. And I think they do a better job of this in the movie, or excuse me, Tolkien does a better job of this. And I don't think it wasn't even Peter Jackson's intention to talk about or to display all of the efforts of the various elves to find them and bring them to Rivendell safely, and all of the things that are happening kind of beyond just Aragorn and the hobbits walking through the wilderness. But yeah, that was something that kind of jumped out to me. It's like Frodo puts the ring on, the Witch King sees him as he's invisible. He goes to the effort of stabbing him in the shoulder. You could just go 3 inches to the left and get him right in the neck. Movie over. Anyway.
What's next?
Something that I had not the first time I've noticed, but I appreciated it more so in this watch, is after Saruman communicates with Sauron via the Palantir, and Sauron tells him to build him an army worthy of Mordor. Saruman is sitting in his study with, curled up in his robe. He looks shell-shocked. It's just such a good, this is the guy we just saw beat Gandalf in a duel, and he is shaken.
Defeated.
Yeah, shaken and defeated and intimidated, all of these negative emotions after a Skype call with his boss. And That's pretty much it, I think. Oh, one final thing. Cut from in the theatrical version, everybody knows that Boromir, as soon as the ring comes out, he says, "This is a gift. We should use this against the enemy." In the extended edition, there's a scene where Boromir gets up and he approaches the ring, and it looks like he's about to take it, and then Gandalf starts reciting black speech, and you have Elrond kind of get a headache, and Legolas has a headache, and then Elrond says, "Nobody dared to speak. Nobody's ever spoken those words in Imladris." So we get a mention of Imladris, the Elvish name for Rivendell. But then we also get this scene, and I think it does a good job of reinforcing Boromir's character as one who is open to be tempted, right? As one whose desire for strength out of the desperation to save his people and serve his father. They do a good job of that, because the theatrical and the extended edition have the scene of him and the shards of Narsil kind of observing Aragorn, and then he puts it all together at the council when Legolas says, "That's Aragorn, son of Arathorn, you owe him your allegiance," and he says, "Gondor has no king, Gondor needs no king." But this scene that's cut from the theatrical release really drives home the extent to which, it required Gandalf's intervention basically to prevent Boromir from trying to take the ring. So I thought that was interesting.
Throughout the entire first movie, they do a really good job of slowly building up Boromir's eventual deception. When they're at the Pass of Caradhras, when Frodo falls and the ring slips off, and then it's Boromir who picks it up, and then he has that moment where he hesitates to give it back. And then, multiple times throughout Moria, it always looks like Boromir's kind of just side-eyeing Frodo. And then we have the ultimate treacherous moment.
I think this is something that the movie does very well, but the book does it even better. And that there are many things like that, but it's interesting.
The entire fucking novel, man. The movie does everything really well, but then the book just nails it every time.
Well, it's something that Tolkien does a really good job of, because we don't get a lot of we don't get necessarily a lot of dialogue with Boromir. But just the way that he describes Boromir's look, it paints that picture of somebody who is desperate, declining, and they're increasing levels of desperation, kind of culminating in that, the confrontation with Frodo. But it was just, I like the scene. I understand that you don't need that, and the later dialogue of him saying, this is a weapon, this is an opportunity that we should seize, and it might have been a little much. Frankly, with Gandalf, doing black speech, and the sun is hidden all of a sudden, and Elrond is getting a headache. It's a little much. It's a little theatrical for otherwise relatively tame, with the exception of Gimli, who breaks his axe and then immediately says, "You have my axe." So did he bring not one but two axes to this council?
Who's
manning security at the Council of Elrond? You've got somebody sneaking weapons in, and then you have 3 hobbits just hanging out. Secret council.
I'm sure he took Gloin's.
He took his dad's axe.
Yeah, and then when he gets to Moria, he takes one of those axes.
Yeah, that's true.
So, he's just a thief. But that's the first part, Extended Edition's Fellowship of the Ring. Next week, we will discuss what's included in the second part of the Fellowship of the Ring Extended Edition. We've got some cool scenes in Rivendell I'm excited to talk about. That's it. What else do you have, Sam?
That's all I got. Always fun to go back and revisit Lord of the Rings. It is truly... Oh, and I should say, too, the fall is the best time, I feel, to watch Lord of the Rings. Mid-September, roughly the time when Frodo leaves the Shire. I think we get the October the 24th in Rivendell, and I know that they leave Rivendell on what is Christmas Day in our calendar. So it's an excellent fall movie. Watch it with your spiked cider. Watch it with your Oktoberfest beer. Watch it with your pumpkin. However you'd like to. Watch the Lord of the Rings Extended Edition and follow along with our commentary and reactions and discussion.
Well, and this Friday, September 22nd, is Frodo and Bilbo's birthday.
There you go.
So,
which is technically the day that, well, I can't remember in the books if they leave on Frodo's birthday or not, but here we are.
I think they do. Like that night. Maybe it might have turned to the 23rd, but
yeah, because they're in Crickhollow, right? They like toast Bilbo's birthday, and then
no, they do that at Bag End before they leave. Frodo has a small private.
Okay.
After he's sold all of his stuff.
Oh yeah. Oh, so we don't need to talk about it now, but the Sackville Bagginses are actually on screen in the extended edition, which they are not in the theatrical release.
Mm-hmm.
But
okay, you can follow us. You can follow us on Facebook, Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things. We have a group now, Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things. Podcast group, I think is what it's called. But there we can actually do more interaction, like posting polls and things like that. So if you're in the Facebook page and you would like to join the group, please find us. We can be a little bit more interactive there, which is pretty nice. But that's it for me. You can send us emails at elvesringsnerdythings@gmail.com. And Sam, sign us off.
All right, everybody. Thank you for joining. We appreciate your listening, and we will talk to you, or you will listen to us next week. Bye.